Do you know what a guilt trip is? You ever been on a guilt trip? Have you ever tried to guilt trip somebody else? Sometimes preachers do this. In fact, I grew up on some guilt trip sermons. One of those sermons was the annual sermon on giving. And what would happen is, the elders would say to the preacher, hey, giving's down. Time to get that sermon out, and dust it off and brush it up and encourage the church to give some more. By the way, that you're doing great. We have a very generous congregation, and that's not a lesson for today, although I'm not above preaching that lesson if necessary. So continue in your good offerings. The other lesson that would come up, and this was about once a year, maybe you have had my same experience, it was the lesson on the Great Commission, right? And the lesson was, hey, Jesus gave us this command that we are to go and make disciples, to baptize and to teach. And it was a reminder to us once a year that if you are not out there making disciples and helping people become followers of Jesus, well, you're not obeying Jesus. Well, what was interesting to me in all of those lessons was it always seemed to me that it was presented in sort of an optional way. Now, what I mean by that was it wasn't a guilt trip where they're saying that, well, you should, you ought, or you must do this, or you're not a faithful Christian and you're going to be condemned forever if you don't do this. It was Jesus commanded it, and we think you should probably do it. And it's almost like the sense in which it wasn't for everybody, but only for people who were talented in the area of evangelism or disciple making, or employed in the area of doing such a thing, or if they happen to be charismatic and they really like to do it, right? But it really wasn't for everyone. But everyone would kind of be reminded that Jesus said this, and that it was something that we should probably do. Now, fast forward 30 or 40 years later, and we are experiencing an age where churches are in decline, and maybe it's time for us to talk about this, not in the category of you probably should or maybe you ought to do this, but that we must begin to obey Jesus in his command to make disciples. I'm going to make a very strong point of that today. And I'm not trying to guilt trip you for one lesson. I'm going to do it for the next year, okay? So I'm going to go for it on this because I really think that not the Great Commission is our problem. We understand what Jesus has sent us to do. We just haven't been willing to do it. And that's why I'm saying Great Commission or Great Omission. Have we forgotten that upon the resurrection of Jesus and before his ascension into heaven, that he gave us one and only one command, and that was to go and make disciples, to baptize and to teach. If your parents told you to do something when you were a kid and you did not do that one something, what would happen? Well, you'd get in some pretty serious trouble. What if you said back to your parents, well, I meant to do it, and I'll get to it later? Or what if you said to your parents, I talked about it with my brothers and sisters, and we had a great study about what it meant for me to do what you told me to do? You would still be in some serious trouble, right? Well, the truth is, this isn't something of debate. This isn't something that we can just say, hey, I'll do that if I get around to it. I'll do that, or I'll talk about it, and maybe someday I'll get to it. What we tend to do is either omit it from our life practices or justify not doing it through some excuses. Okay? And so every time this subject comes up about making disciples or being evangelistic or something like that, I hear the same set of excuses. I hear the same thing. Well, I'm just not gifted in that area. Have you ever said that? I'm just not gifted in that area. I just don't know how, I'm just not gifted. I think that requires somebody that's really charismatic, that can get out there and meet people and drum up conversations and somehow be evangelistic. It's only for people that have a certain amount of giftedness. Jesus didn't say, if you are gifted, go and make disciples. He said to go and make disciples. Some people say some things like this. Well, what if they ask me questions and I don't know the answer? And my response to that is, they're going to ask you questions, and you're not going to know the answer. And that's okay. You don't have to know all the answers. If Jesus had said, if you know all the answers, go and make disciples, then that would be a great excuse, because you could say, I don't have all the answers. By the way, I've been doing this for quite a long time, and you know what? I still don't have all the answers. I still have people ask me questions, and I say, that's a great question. I'm going to go back and study that because I think there's a good answer, but I'd like to give you a good answer. Could we talk about that next Tuesday or next Wednesday or whenever we can reschedule? we seem to come up with lots of excuses. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough education. I don't have enough money. My house is a mess. I can't have people into my home, or my house looks too nice and I don't want to mess it up. I mean, we come up with all kinds of reasons why we can't simply obey Jesus' command to go and make disciples. And I think in part that's because we have not been taught directly that in order to be evangelistic, you have to have all of these things in order, but we've been given that impression by some people who have been evangelistic. And so we've seen some people who have big personalities, and they've gone around the country teaching people how to make disciples, and it seems like they're really good at doing it, but we're not really good at doing what they're doing. Several years ago, I went to McDonald's at a youth ministry, or at a youth event when I think I was a teenager, and we were with Willie Franklin. Do you guys know who Willie Franklin is? Willie Franklin has a personality that is bigger than any room he's ever been in. The guy has got a great personality. He was a former NFL football player for I think the Baltimore Colts at one time, and he's just got a great personality. So he goes into McDonald's, and I am not kidding. He was in there. He was talking to the people behind the counter. He was at one point picking up people's children that he didn't know, he had never seen before. Like, they're picking up and walking around the restaurant, reading the Bible to people. How many of you would be comfortable doing that? You know why? Because you're not Willie Franklin. You can't do what Willie Franklin can do. And if I tried to do that, I think some mom would slap me on the hand and say, get away from my kid. Don't touch him, right? Maybe you don't have that charisma. Maybe you don't have all that knowledge. Maybe you don't have all that experience. What I'm trying to say to you today is that I don't think that all of those things are prerequisites to obedience when it comes to the command to go and make disciples. And I want to share some thoughts with you today that I think will maybe help orient you towards what it means for you to be a disciple maker in our context in 2025. All right, so at the end of Matthew, some really important things have happened. In fact, the greatest things ever have happened. Jesus dies, he's buried, and he's raised from the dead. And in this newness of life that he has, this resurrected body, he's meeting with his disciples, he's talking to them. And as he's about to ascend into heaven in a few weeks, at the end of Matthew's gospel, he makes this in verse 16. He says, but the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated. He said, go ahead and go over here, I'm going to meet you there. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some were doubtful. Do you find that kind of interesting? That some were doubtful. Like, after all they had been through with Jesus in his life, in his death, in his burial, and now his resurrection, he's meeting with them, and some were doubtful. If you ever have had doubts in your mind about some things about following Jesus or about your faith, you're in good company, because people who spent tons of time with Jesus themselves still had some doubts. And Jesus is going to relieve those doubts, but that's going to take some time. Verse 18, it says, and Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Please help me answer this question. How much authority is that, church? It's all of it, right? Jesus has all authority everywhere, and he has proven it. He proved it by the way he taught. He proved it by the way he healed people, by the way he cast out demons, and he proved it by the way he overcame death. Jesus has authority everywhere, in heaven and on earth. And so he says, with that in mind, with all of that authority that he has in mind, he says, I'm going to give you an order. And the order sounds like this. He says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Let me kind of break that down for you just a little bit. Sometimes we read something like that and we think, well, that's for people who are going to be missionaries, right? Because they're going to go and they're going to make disciples in all the nations. And that's not me, because I'm going to go to work tomorrow morning and I'm going to live right here. And that means that I'm exempt from that command. That's not what Jesus is saying. That word is a present participle, and the word go actually means as you are going. It's an ongoing process. So as you are going to work, as you are going through your day, as you are going to school, as you are going to play, whatever you are doing, wherever you are going, you are in a process that Jesus has commanded and sent you to do of making disciples. And what that means is that there are people in your life, people in your proximity that you can reach with the gospel. It may be your wife or your husband. It might be your children. It might be your neighbor. It might be your parents. It might be your extended family. It might be your coworkers. It might be people at school. Look, it could be anywhere and everywhere that you are going. As you are going, he says, make disciples. And what we often think that means, and I'm trying to attack some of these ideas that we have, is that with everyone that I have in my life, I have to do one of two things. I have to have a Bible study with them, and I have to get them to come to church. Okay? Those are the two things. And if they will sit down and have a Bible study with me that's very structured with the intention of teaching them to become a follower of Jesus and be baptized, then I'm obeying this command. That's the first thing. The other thing is get them to come to church. In fact, I would argue that we have taken evangelism and reduced it to simply getting people to come to church. There are a lot of people that come to church that never choose to follow Jesus. There are a lot of people that come to church every Sunday who still are not following Jesus Monday through Saturday. I would suggest that what Jesus is trying to teach us to do, and what I'm going to demonstrate to some degree today, is to help people first become followers of Jesus. You might convince them of something prematurely. You might convince them to come to church, and that's not a bad thing. I think we should invite them to church, but that's not the goal. We have measured, I think, success as churches by saying how many people came to church. What was our attendance? What was our budget? How many baptisms have we had? What if we changed the playing card just a little bit? What if we changed our metric to say that the church is only as healthy as it is in obedience to Jesus as being disciple makers? In fact, what if we only counted the people who were disciple makers in our congregation? What if we just said that only the people, that's our health, to measure our health, who are disciple makers, tell us who the health of our church, what our health is? I can say that in some other order that makes more sense. But if we were to measure how many people we have in our context that are making disciples, that would tell us how obedient we are to Jesus' command for the mission of the church, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. And so when you think about it, I'm not asking, and Jesus isn't asking for you to sit down and have some kind of a big Bible study with somebody, although I wouldn't discourage that. He's also not saying just invite them to church and let the church do it. I think he's saying that we need to cultivate space in our life with people who are not yet Christians so that we can begin to influence them and encourage them and help them answer questions and help them deal with the problems of life. We have found such a great treasure in Jesus Christ. Wouldn't we want to share that with everyone? Everyone, everywhere, as we are going through life. So Jesus says, go, therefore, and make disciples. And then he qualifies what it means to make disciples by saying that it has something to do with baptizing them and teaching them as a part of an ongoing process, and then remembering that Jesus is with us always, even to the end of the age. And so he says, go therefore, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. What is the mission of the church? Have you seen churches do this where you try to sit down, or the leadership tries to sit down and tries to pin out, this is the mission of the church. The mission of the church is, and they fill in some kind of a grand vision or some kind of a mission. I'm not sure that that's altogether bad. I think that maybe there's something to that to help us focus on some things. But often what we come up with is something that replaces the mission that Jesus sent us with. Because I really don't think that we have the right to tell, for me to tell you as a church what the mission of the church is. I think Jesus, who has all authority, has the right to do that. Now, I've seen a number of things come out of that. I've seen people say, well, the mission of the church is, maybe you have yours, but these are the ones that I've heard, keeping the saved saved. That's the mission of the church. By the way, that has diminishing returns. If our job is to keep the saved saved, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to focus on people who are already Christians, and what's not going to happen is there will be no reproduction of discipleship, and we will become smaller and smaller and smaller. We have been called not to be keepers of an aquarium, as some have said in the past, but to be fishers of men. And by the way, I think that the best way to keep the saved saved is to employ them and train them to be people who are making disciples. When we obey Jesus, it actually helps us remain faithful to our own following Jesus. Another one that I've heard is, well, the church's mission is to achieve and maintain doctrinal purity, and sometimes even they use the word perfection. What's the problem with having doctrinal perfection? No one has it. right? Everyone at some point is going to be wrong on something. I know you think I'm always right. I know you guys think that. But it's not true. Sometimes I have to change my mind on things. I'm kidding with you. Of course, you know that, right? You're like, yeah, we knew that, Sam. Yeah, a long time ago. But the truth is, it's not about doctrinal purity and protection. We need to protect the church from any kind of teaching that might not be exactly what we think. And what we do is we protect the church to death. And no one can become a part of it because no one can achieve the level of perfection and purity that we expect. That is a problem. In fact, some people have even called this in theological terms what they call precision obedience. And the idea is very, very works-based. Now, am I suggesting by saying that we shouldn't try to be right and try to achieve some level of rightness about what we teach? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if that becomes the goal of the church and the mission of the church, then what we're going to do is we're going to become a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller group of people. All right, some people say, and I've heard this one said, that we need to be the best church of Christ, okay? I'm actually quoting this, so that when Church of Christ people move into our area, they'll go to our Church of Christ and not the other Church of Christ down the road. Is that the mission of the church? No, it's not. And I'm not going to say anything more about it. Some things are self-evident. That is not what Jesus sent us to do or wants us to be. And so as you go down the list of things, that we could replace Jesus' command with, it comes up with something that's going to have diminishing returns. And so when we look at this command from Jesus, I think what it produces is a couple of things. I think it produces disciples who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. Now, if you could write that down and just contemplate what I mean by that, and what I think Jesus means by that, is I think it means that we would constantly be in a process as we go through life of being disciples who are reproducing discipleship, and the disciples that are following Jesus as a result of us would also reach out and cause people to become disciples. It's a reproducing kind of discipleship that doesn't just show up and make you feel guilty once a year. It's the way that we live. It's the way of life as we obey Jesus. And I think that ultimately, and I'll save this for another lesson someday, that we would become churches that produce churches that produce churches, that we would multiply in a way that the gospel would spread throughout a region. If you were to add up all of the churches of Christ in the Denver metropolitan area and compare their entire attendance to the metropolitan area demographics, to how many people live here, it's like 3.5 million people, we've got a lot of work to do, wouldn't you say? We've got a lot of work to do. And so discipleship that produces discipleship, churches that produce churches, that's the kind of growing and maturing thing that I think Jesus has sent us to do, to go and to make disciples. Now, turn with me to Ephesians chapter 4, and I want to introduce you to an idea that I call the hard work of ministry. The hard work of ministry. Wouldn't it be great if we could just reduce everything to 3 easy steps, right? Ever have a marriage problem? Oh, hey, here's 3 easy steps to having a great marriage. You could probably write a book like that, but I think it's going to take more than 3 easy steps to a great marriage. Or what if we could just solve every problem that we have in the church by saying 3 easy steps to solve all of these problems? I don't think that that's that easy. In fact, I think that most of the really substantial work that happens in church happens by doing the hard work of ministry. We do this all the time. So Sherry can confirm this. We put something in the email. We say, we need this. Please volunteer. And we hear crickets, right? I don't even know if you know that, but when you don't respond, we can hear crickets on our emails. But then I call 4 or 5 people directly, and you all say yes. And it's because you thought somebody else was going to do it, right? Or I was going to do it if nobody else did it, right? So that's the easy way. Send the email out. The hard way is to call people and ask, will you teach this class? Will you take this meal? That's the hard work of ministry in a very small sort of way. By the way, if you do see those things in the emails, you should respond. That would be fine. But the hard work of ministry is that we actually have to do things of substance and difficulty. We have to be prepared to answer questions. We have to study. We have to train others. We have to equip people. And Paul knew that about the church. And in Ephesians chapter 4, he's writing about this, and we're going to start in verse 11. He says he gave some as, Ephesians 4:11, he gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, and some as pastors and teachers, okay? And some people have called this the fivefold ministry of equipping the church, because the very next verse he says that these five are given for the equipping of the saints for the works of service, to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. What has he done? He said that there are people within the church that have matured to a point where they now are going to equip others for works of ministry. And if you were the one that was saying, my excuse is, that's not my job in the church, or I'm not that kind of person in the church, or I don't have that kind of giftedness, I want you to rethink that, because Jesus gave you and he gave me, he gave every one of us the same directive, that we are to go and make disciples. And part of the church is going to mature to a point where we can take and invest in you and help train you and equip you for doing works of ministry, most of which involves making disciples, helping other people become a part of the body in such a way that it can grow up and mature and become more and more like Jesus. And so the hard work of ministry isn't something that just happens by osmosis. It doesn't happen by just showing up every Sunday and eating some donuts and drinking some coffee and enduring my sermons, okay? It's going to come through some hard work. And the hard work of ministry is that it will require training, and it will require you to be open to receive that training in a way that could produce some results for the kingdom, that could produce a growing church. To be a disciple who is making disciples and obeying the command of Jesus. That's the hard work of ministry. He finishes that thought by saying, as a result of this, we are no longer to be children tossed here and there by waves and carried by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, the craftiness of deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. The hard work of ministry comes by virtue of equipping and training and receiving and trying and doing the things that lead to the works of service that the body of Christ is called to, so that it might be healthy and mature, and so that it might grow, so that it might actually increase. Couple of thoughts. I've been spending some time with Patrick this summer as our intern, and some of the things I've been trying to teach him have to do with what we see in Jesus and how we copy that in our own lives, and it's relevant to what we're doing here today. The first thing I've been trying to teach him is that we need to learn to be incarnational in the way that we live. Now, that's kind of a big idea, but let me explain. The idea of the incarnation is that God, in John chapter 1, Jesus, God becomes flesh, and what does he do? He lives among us, okay? God becomes us. Incarnation means that God becomes flesh and lives among us. And what we should learn from that is that when Jesus becomes flesh and lives among us, he sets for us an example of how we are to live, what we are to teach, where we're supposed to go, the kind of people we're supposed to interact with, the kinds of things we're supposed to resist. Like, those are all things that Jesus shows us, not just through his words, but also through his actions. And so when we talk about being incarnational, what we're trying to do is learn to be more like Jesus. Like, if we're going to grow up to the measure, the stature, the fullness of Christ, like we just read in Ephesians chapter 4, that would require us to take a very long look at Jesus and not only hear what he said, but pay attention to what he was doing. Jesus was with people. He was with people that other people who were very religious wouldn't spend time with. Jesus was criticized for spending time with tax collectors and sinners. He was the one that was eating and drinking with people who were not the kind of people that the religious establishment thought that he should spend time with. God saw to it that he would become one of us and live with us so that we could see what he wanted us to do in this life. And that's what we mean by being incarnational. There's a couple of things that I think fall off of that I've been teaching Patrick. One is what I call the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence. It's simply this, that when you are present with people in your life, you have the opportunity to influence them. Now, if you're a hermit and you're in your house and you live by yourself and you never go out, you never go anywhere, you're probably not here today, okay? But if you're kind of like a person that goes out for walks or goes to places and gets around other people, you go to church, you go to the supermarket, you go to play pickleball. Apparently that's a big thing these days. I've never played pickleball, and I don't think I'm old enough yet to play pickleball. I don't know, maybe I am, but you go and you do things in life. You go and be present with people. Do you know how to make a friend? Do you know how to do that? Do you know how to make a friend? Well, the very first step is you got to find someone who isn't already a friend. You got to go and be around them. The ministry of presence is simply that I go and I put myself in places where there's a possibility that I could cultivate a friendship. I can make space in my life for that to happen. God became flesh and he became present among us. And he influenced people's lives for the better because of it. And if you, as a follower of Jesus, would make yourself present and available to people who are not yet Christians, you might have the same effect on them as you represent Christ in that context. I have been going for the last few months and being a part of doing this thing called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. There's not a lot of grace involved in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I'm getting choked out. They're strangling me and then letting me go and asking me if I'm okay. I'm getting arm barred. My shoulders hurt all the time, but I'm loving it. I'm having a great time, right? Doesn't that sound kind of weird? I've met 7 new people through that process that I've begun new friendships with. And all I've done is make myself present and let them choke me out several times. See how easy this is? It's so easy to do that, right? You don't have to do what I'm doing. I'm just saying that if you get yourself into places where you can meet people and cultivate friendships, make some space for that. I had a friend years ago. She came to me and said, after a similar lesson like this back in Michigan, she said, I don't know anyone who's not a Christian. And I said, well, what are you going to do about that? And she goes, I don't know. I said, are your neighbors Christian? She said, I don't know. I don't talk to my neighbors. And I said, how about this week? You go and talk to your neighbor. Turns out her neighbor wasn't a Christian and was a pretty great person, and they got to be friends. They got to talk, and that was just creating space in your life and making some intentional effort to be present with people. Does that make sense to you? Because I could keep going if you want me to. I want you to get this one. The ministry of presence. Go and be with tax collectors and sinners. Go and be with the people who are not yet following Jesus. And you up the odds dramatically that they might become followers of Jesus. The second one, and this is going to be the last one that I share with you today because I can see I'm going to run out of time, is the ministry of persistence. The ministry of persistence. Okay. Turn with me to Luke chapter 10 for just a second. I want you to see something. The ministry of persistence is what I'm calling this. And this is in Luke chapter 10, verses 5 and 6 is what I'm going to look at in just a second. Sometimes what we do is we show up in a person's life, but we're inconsistent, okay? Or we meet some kind of a barrier. And I don't know what that barrier is. Maybe you get to talking to somebody and you find out that they voted for someone that you didn't vote for. Oh no, now we can't be friends anymore. Or, oh no, they could never become a Christian if they voted for that person, so we just give up. Or we find out that they have a sin problem in their life. Oh, well, shocker. Guess who in this church here has no sin problems? Nobody, right? We all have sin problems. And maybe we're further away from the sin problems we used to have. Maybe we struggle a bit less than we used to struggle with them, but every single person in here was a sinner in need of saving. And because of that, we are grateful to Jesus for actually delivering us from the consequences of that sin so that we could become the people who overcome that sin throughout our life. Does that make sense to you? So persistence means that not only am I present with you, but I don't ditch you at the first sign of trouble. I'm going to be a persistent presence in your life over time, not because we're so closely united on every subject, but often in spite of the fact that we're not closely united on every subject. I'm going to be present with people and persistent with people over time. Now, we have to know whether a person is a person of peace and is seeking, or a person is not a person of peace and not seeking. And that much is clear in Luke chapter 10. Because what's happening in Luke 10 is Jesus has sent the disciples out 2 by 2 to go to cities ahead of him. And he says this, he says that when you go to these places, you go to a person's home, you don't take anything with you. In other words, no excuses. Just go. You don't have to take money. You don't have to take extra clothes. Don't even take extra sandals, no money belt, nothing. Just go ahead. And if there is a person of peace there, what are you supposed to do? Read it with me. Luke chapter 10, verses 5 and 6, he says, He says, whatever house you enter, first say, peace to this house. And if a man of peace is there, your peace will rest on him. If not, it will return to you. So what he ultimately says in this is that when you go to these people in your life and you're present with them and you're persisting, there's a time to know when to stay, and there is actually still a time to know when to go or to wait. And he says that if there's a person at peace there, then you stay with them, and you continue with them for a season. You persist with them. And if there is not a person of peace there, and by the way, I think that means a person who is ready and willing to hear and to consider and to think about spiritual things, to consider the gospel, to consider the existence of God, to consider any of these things. If there is not a person of peace there, what does he say for them to do? Keep on trucking, keep on moving. You look to find people who are welcoming and are people of peace, and you persist with those people. So the ministry, the hard work of ministry, is being present with people, first of all. Second of all, I think it is the ministry of persistence. And if we were to add another P to this here, because I'm a preacher, I would say the ministry of peace, that we would look for people who are welcoming of hearing about Jesus and hearing about the gospel. And I think that we should remember that when Jesus gives this commission, it is not a recommendation, it's not a suggestion, it's something that Jesus is commanding of us, that we go, we make disciples, we teach and we baptize, and we remember that Jesus is with us always, even to the end of the age. You are not alone in what you are doing when you're trying to share the greatest news that you've ever heard, the greatest message that has changed your life in ways that are often hard for us even to articulate, because we don't even yet know how grand and how awesome the gift of salvation in Jesus really is ultimately. We're still learning as we go through this life what that actually means. I want to encourage you, and I'm going to talk more about this next week. I want to encourage you to consider what Jesus has said and obey him and become a person who is a disciple following Jesus, encouraging others to be disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And I think that I'm going to end it right here because I believe I've crossed my 33-minute limit. I said 30, but those are preacher minutes. They take longer. Let's pray together, and then we'll continue this lesson next week.